forecasting the unpredictable. This week on Inside the Economist's Mind, we crack open the complex models that shape national policy advice for fiscal authorities. Explore the high-stakes debate over the future of macroeconomic forecasting. Should the Treasury stick to the existing three-phase approach or embrace a new macro-econometric model for projections stretching up to 41 years? We examine the essential techniques used for analyzing tax policy, from advanced computable general equilibrium (CGE) models like CGETAX to microsimulation models like CAPITA used for assessing equity impacts on individual households. Plus, find out why overlapping generations (OLG) models are key to studying crucial intergenerational issues like retirement incomes and public debt. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is, well, it's all about managing complexity. We're digging into the specific models used by government financial authorities, your Treasury, to forecast the economic future and, maybe more importantly, to assess the impact of major policies.
It's a really fascinating exercise in distillation, This review, it's basically an audit. It benchmarks their current tools and recommended roadmaps across the macroeconomic, revenue, and fiscal groups against, well, the best international practices.
And what stands out?
What immediately jumps out is the high priority they give to models that can handle structural change and the long term. I mean, models that can see 40 years into the future, that's a much bigger focus than models that are just optimized for the short-term business cycle.
Okay, let's unpack this. We should probably start with that longest view, the macroeconomic group. They're handling the core forecasts, which have to stretch all the way out to 41 years to support the intergenerational report, the IGR.
That's right.
And the source material says they currently use something called the three-phase approach, which honestly sounds surprisingly simple for such a huge task.
Simple and highly mechanical. Phase 1 is the short-term, years 1 and 2. It uses the updated National Accounting Forecasting Framework, or NFF, alongside a pretty loose collection of maybe a dozen individual regression equations.
So they're not really connected.
Not strongly, no. They're just data-based guesses for the immediate future.
That seems okay for right now, but what happens when they try to look further out?
Then you hit phase 2. This is the mechanical part. It covers years 3 through 7, and they call it the cyclical adjustment phase.
Okay.
And here, they just assume that any labor market imbalance, so the unemployment rate, has to linearly converge to the long-run sustainable rate, the NARU, over exactly 5 years.
Well, linearly. So if unemployment is high in year 3, they just draw a straight line down to the target in year 7, no matter what's actually happening in the economy.
Exactly.
It's basically like closing your eyes and setting the GPS to return to normal over 5 years, regardless of traffic or how much fuel you have left.
That's a perfect analogy. It's an assumption, not a modeled outcome. And then phase 3, which runs from year 8 all the way to year 41, is based simply on the 3 Ps.
The 3P.
Population growth, participation rates, and productivity improvements.
If that simple 3P model covers 4 decades, why is the push to replace the whole system so urgent? It sounds like it gets the job done.
Because that mechanical adjustment, it only accounts for the labor market. The core flaw is that the 3-phase approach completely ignores imbalances in capital stocks, private savings, net assets, and, critically, government deficits and public debt. So if the government is running massive deficits, the 3Ps model just assumes the economy magically gets back to its potential. It doesn't account for the drag from mounting debt or, misallocated capital.
So the 3-phase model could generate a long-term projection that looks perfectly healthy, even if the underlying financial reality suggests a crisis is brewing.
Precisely. It can't anticipate those future financial swings because it doesn't model how multiple imbalances in savings, investment, and debt are historically resolved over time.
Which brings us to the recommended solution, a new macro-econometric model. You said it combines theory and data, but isn't that what every complex model tries to do? What's different here?
The difference is the integration and the mandate. This new model is designed to blend strong short-term empirics. So, database dynamics, looking at how the economy actually reacted to debt last time with well-defined long-run economic properties, that's the theory part.
So theory-based equilibrium.
Exactly. It makes sure the model doesn't predict impossible outcomes, like, say, debt growing forever without any consequences.
So it's about making sure the long-term forecast is constrained by real-world economic laws while still being informed by what the short-term data is telling us.
And the huge advantage is that it generates forecasts seamlessly over the full 2 to 41-year horizon. It gets rid of those jarring mechanical switches between phase 1, 2, and 3.
The review suggested building this new model using the existing NF framework as a starting point. Is that really a good idea? Or are they risking, baking the old problems into the new system just to make the transition easier for staff?
That's a fair question. It's presented as a pragmatic management call. You preserve prior research, you ease the learning curve. But structurally, the review seems to think the core architecture of NAFF is salvageable. It's the external mechanical phase switching that has to go, replaced by integrated, theoretically sound modeling.
Before we move on, we should touch on the other macro models. They mentioned vector autoregression or VAR models.
Right, those are purely data-based, useful for short-term cross-checks, but a lower priority.
And then there are the DSGE models, dynamic stochastic general equilibrium. These are the really complex, theory-based ones that central banks love for monetary policy.
Yes, and they were also deemed a lower priority for a fiscal authority like the Treasury.
Okay, hold on. This is where it gets really interesting to me. You're saying they're building the complex Ferrari of models, the DSGE, replicating the RBA's version, but they openly state they do not intend to use their version for countercyclical analysis.
That's what the review says.
But that's its primary purpose. That's its whole reason for being.
It is the main rationale, yes. It raises some pretty big questions about resource allocation. Why invest so much in a model designed for monetary policy questions when you're a fiscal authority focused on 41-year forecasts and then rule out its main function?
It just confirms where their priorities are.
It does. Long-term structural modeling is paramount.
That makes the priority list crystal clear. So if the macro-econometric model sets the big picture, we need tools to analyze the specific policy levers. Let's shift to the revenue group and tax policy. This is about two things, right? Economic efficiency and equity.
Exactly. And for long-run economic efficiency, how a permanent policy like a tax reform changes behavior and output. The international standard is the computable general equilibrium model, and a CGE model.
So if the DSGE model tells the central bank when to hit the brakes, the CGE model is like the architect redesigning the entire tax highway.
That's a good way to put it. And the Treasury is upgrading its CGE model to something called CGETAX.
What's the biggest leap this provides?
It's all about specificity and realism. The old model was, well, too abstract. CGETAX dramatically increases the depth, so you can better model things like multinational profit shifting, and the breadth. It covers 12 categories of taxes, up from just 5.
That's a big jump.
It is. But the crucial enhancement is how it treats personal income tax.
How so?
The old model basically treated income tax as proportional, a huge simplification. CGETAX actually incorporates the progressive nature of the system. It distinguishes between marginal and average tax rates.
And that's important because
the marginal rate is what dictates the incentive to work or save the behavioral response. The average rate just tells you the overall burden. If you ignore that distinction, you fundamentally misstate the economic impact of any tax reform.
that specificity is vital. Okay, so from efficiency to equity, how do they use microsimulation models like CAPITA to see who wins or loses from a policy change?
These models simulate the impact on a huge sample of individual households. They let you see the distributional effects across different income levels, different family types, different stages of life.
But the source material flags a big academic critique here.
It does. Researchers like Auerbach and Level point out that true economic welfare depends on a household's lifetime real income, not just what they earn in 1 year.
Right.
So if models only look at current income, they can create a really distorted picture. Think about a medical student. They have a low current income, but a very high lifetime income potential. A tax break targeting low current income might mistakenly benefit the student while missing someone who's truly needy over their whole life.
So the recommendation is that CAPITA has to be extended to report impacts on both current and lifetime incomes. You need the whole picture.
You absolutely do. And whenever we talk about big tax changes, we have to talk about the feedback loop, the behavioral changes that affect the government's budget. We call that dynamic scoring.
So when should the government actually do dynamic scoring?
The review sets a clear threshold. Any material tax change with a gross budgetary effect of 0.25% of GDP or more. For those big changes, they have to account for the economy-wide responses.
For example,
If you lower corporate tax, you encourage investment. That boosts GDP, which in turn leads to higher payroll taxes, higher consumption taxes, and that partially offsets the initial cost of the tax cut. That's the dynamic feedback they have to capture.
okay, that brings us to our final piece, the Fiscal Group. They handle the longest view, the budget projections for the 41-year IGR. This is where the macro forecast meets the budget details.
And this section raises a really important structural issue. It's about how revenue is projected beyond the first 4 years. Australia traditionally switches from a detailed bottom-up projection to a top-line one,
Rename.
meaning they effectively hold total tax revenue fixed as a share of GDP after about 7 years. They do this to counteract fiscal drag.
Let's define fiscal drag. That's bracket creep, right? When inflation pushes your wages up into a higher tax bracket, even if your real purchasing power hasn't changed.
Exactly. It's an automatic tax hike. The current Australian approach basically assumes the government will pass tax cuts every 7 years or so to prevent that, holding the overall tax-to-GDP ratio constant.
The other countries do it differently.
They do. Fiscal authorities in the UK, Canada, and New Zealand, they all maintain a detailed bottom-up projection for the whole period. But they just switch off the effect of bracket creep after 5 to 7 years.
So they model the existing tax code in detail, but they just stop assuming that automatic tax hike keeps happening forever?
Correct. It's a much more transparent approach.
So the recommendation is to shift the IGR to that bottom-up approach, like our peers, and also to issue the report in the Treasury's name for greater independence. That feels like a political recommendation on top of a technical one.
It speaks to the integrity of the forecast. If the method is transparent and seen as politically independent, it just strengthens its credibility.
Okay, let's wrap up with the really specialized models for these intergenerational stakes. The overlapping generations, or OLG models. How are these different from the CGE models we talked about?
OLG models are a very specific type of CGE model. Their core feature is that they explicitly track successive generations, sometimes up to 80 distinct generations, over their entire life cycles. They're built to model long-term demographic change.
Why do you need 80 generations?
Because a policy today, like increasing public debt, is felt differently by the generation working now, the ones saving for retirement, and the ones who haven't even been born yet. OLG models let you do scenario analysis on those specific intergenerational issues, like retirement incomes or public debt.
So are they recommended for baseline forecasting, like the new macro-econometric model?
No, and that's a crucial distinction. They are generally ill-suited for baseline forecasting. They're too complex and they lack short-term dynamics. But they're listed as a medium priority for providing policy sensitivity analysis around the IGR baseline.
Ah, so they let you test what-if scenarios.
Exactly. They let the Treasury model complex behavioral responses, like how changing retirement incentives might change national saving habits over decades, which simpler models just can't do.
So when you put it all together, what's the big aha moment? It seems to be this universal pivot away from simple mechanical assumptions towards robust, integrated models that are tailored for structural policy.
That's it exactly. You see the push for the macro-econometric model to integrate debt and capital into the 41-year forecast. You see the shift to CGETAX for detailed marginal tax analysis, and you see the demand for lifetime income measures for a better look at equity. It shows a really sophisticated understanding of what a modern fiscal authority needs.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought for you to consider, based on the overall management priorities in the review. Macro-econometric modeling was listed as the highest priority for new development. That was followed by OLG models, and only then the DSGE models.
A very clear ranking.
So, if a fiscal authority's ultimate modeling priority is not DSGE, the model favored by central banks, but rather a model designed to project outcomes over 41 years and assess the economic impact of structural tax shifts and demographic change, what does that tell you about the fundamental long-term mandate of government financial policy? That mandate is stability in structure, not just managing the current business cycle. Something to mull over until our next deep dive.